want to start by welcoming you all and to say that as I look around the room, I can honestly say that I'm a blessed man to see such remarkable people here, dear, dear friends, and some people who are doing some remarkable people on this planet and in this country. And of course, I want to say, of course, that my dear sister, Judge Corey Weston, is here from New York. You gotta talk to her, she's great. And Todd Hoskins, who's been involved with this book for many years, came from Costa Rica. Vanessa Robersham, my right-hand person, is here from New Hampshire. Kelly Asato came from Boston. She does remarkable work and is one of our certified trainers for the Weston Network. It's great to see you here. I'll probably say more as we go along. All the people who have helped Jackie Freeland, thank you very much. Debbie Lynn Molino, who's doing remarkable work with the Bridge Alliance, and Cheryl Gray, who's doing amazing work for democracy. And more. I'm sure it'll come to me as I go along. But I want to thank you all, Louise Green, for doing remarkable work. And there's so many people, and I hope you all get to meet each other when we finish this. But I just wanted to welcome you all and say thank you. And to start us off, I'd like to welcome a dear, dear friend of mine and mentor who has been such a remarkable support for me in so many ways. And for me, models everything that I aspire to be, what I would say is the embodiment of fierce compassion and loving kindness. Last Sarmiento, can you start us off?
Hi everyone, good to be here. And I met Joe in 2008 through a mutual friend who said, "You need to meet my friend," and I'm so glad I did, because prior to meeting Joe, my middle name was Doormat. And I took his respectful confrontation workshop, and now I'm a badass. Many of you probably are as well. So Joe's been a dear, dear friend and beloved teacher. I love the workshops so much that I started producing them for Joe here in DC, and even lured Joe to the DC area. So much so that he actually lives in my condo. And is a wonderful tenant. Very loving. So I'd like to start us off with just a brief meditation, just to settle us in and gather us together. So if you would, standing or sitting down, just find a comfortable posture that your body would enjoy at this time of day. Going inwards in whatever way works best for you, allowing your eyes to close or create soft gaze downwards. Taking some nice deep breaths in and out to allow yourself to fully arrive here together. Letting go of any worries or concerns. Cultivating a sense of presence and connection with yourself and each other. Feeling your feet or your seat on your chair. Begin to establish a sense of groundedness, stability, and dignity in your posture. The dignity of remembering your inherent worthiness of belonging and existence on the planet. With the next deep breath, gently bringing your attention all the way down through your body, down your legs and into your feet. And imagining as best you can the unconditional support of the earth, holding you, us, and all beings on the planet at this time. Reminding us of our interconnectedness with each other and nature. Next deep breath, gently bringing your attention up through the crown of your head and expanding your awareness out into the vast, open, spacious sky above you. A vastness that holds holds great mystery and lends great perspective for us here on earth. The next deep breath, gently bringing your attention to your back body, bringing to mind your loved ones, family, friends, pets, communities that you belong to, the beings in your life who love, support, accept, and encourage who you are as best they can. And if you wish, also honoring and acknowledging your wise and bright ancestors, both blood and cultural, known and unknown, on whose shoulders you stand, and without whom you wouldn't be here. With the next deep breath, gently bringing your attention to your front body, bringing to mind these amazing beings that have come together to celebrate Joe and fierce civility. As you remember your own innate goodness, wisdom, and compassion, and that of each being in this virtual circle. So I also invite us to remember those that came before us and those from whose sacrifices we benefit. So I'd like to acknowledge that we're gathering on the unceded and stolen land of the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples and honor all traditional custodians of this region, humbly asking the ancestors' blessings in being here. I pay respects to the enslaved African peoples brought to, held, and sold on this land and their descendants as we recognize the continuing struggle for liberation. And I pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So I'd like to close with these wishes for all of us. May we have compassion for ourselves and others when suffering is present. May we know that we are not alone. May we have the courage to reach out for support when we need it. May we offer support from a generous and resourced body, heart, and mind. May we have humility, take responsibility, and make amends when we cause harm. May we discern with wisdom and compassion what is true and act as skillfully as we can. And may we forgive ourselves and each other for our humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob, for the words of wisdom and heart, keeping us grounded and centered. I forgot to say the reason why we're here is to talk about my book. So focused on the remarkable people out here and here. So let's do that. I want to introduce Carolyn. Carolyn agreed to do this. Carolyn is a remarkable person. I feel very blessed that I get to be in dialogue with you on this. I would call her an expert in this field on civility, community building. I'll just say a few things about Carolyn. She's been in the democracy reform business for over 30 years. One of her things she did, of the many things, is she was chief of staff of the governor of Ohio sometime in the past. I don't know the exact details of that. She worked in the Clinton-Gore administration, where she did remarkable work there, and decided to start an organization called America Speaks, because she found that there wasn't enough place for the public and discourse in what was being discussed. I met Carolyn when she was the founder and director of the National Institute for Civil Discourse. And it's remarkable. This is a living legend, I would say. So that's my truth. And I'm holding on to it.
Mine too.
Yours too? Okay.
Yes.
So Carolyn, thank you.
I'm delighted and honored to be with you all this evening to, I think, give the first public acknowledgement of fierce civility. I think that's worth a round of applause before we I told Joe when he asked me to do this that I actually love moderating book discussions. I used to do it for the Tucson hold a place of sense of belonging. In this group, we are an amazingly rich, privileged in the best sense of that word. Everybody in this room is, I know, a very important part of at least one community. Joe, Weston's community. In that context, it is my belief that each of us individually and we collectively could take a little bit more risk in how we actually deal with Joe's book. So I'm going to invite you to answer silently 2 questions before Joe and I begin to talk. And they are questions directly connected to your life and the substance of Joe's book. In my experience in the last 7 years of leading the National Institute for Civil Discourse, one of the things that is most difficult for people who hold the values that I think it's fair to assume we all hold is actually understanding those places internally where we are not actually open to civility to a particular group, to a particular person. So my first question to you is to just take a moment, and if you had something to write it, I don't know, but at my age I don't remember much of anything if I don't write it, to literally drop in the way that law just had us do so lovely. And think of a specific person in your world that you know and are willing to acknowledge you aren't necessarily in a zone of civility with that person. And you may have lots of reasons in your mind about why that's true because of that person. My request of you, drop inside, pick the person, and identify how you are holding a place of incivility about that person. The next question I'm going to ask you, and here I'm only familiar with the potential categories in my own country, but I do know this is also happening in a lot of democracy is under threat worldwide. So a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight, and I know we have many international guests, is equally applicable to other societies. But my next question is really, again, dropping in. It's only you who's going to have to know this. What group of people in our society are you holding in a way that you see them as responsible for the incivility that is rampant in our culture? Enough time? One last question. We have to have a place to be released when we come to an honest acknowledgement and wanting to own the 2 questions that I've just asked you. So I'm just going to ask the last question. Who in your life is the person with whom you feel safe enough, because safe is the operable word, that if you chose to, after this evening, and given how lots of you know each other, that person may be in this room, who is a person in your life that you could choose to take what I've just asked you a couple steps further? One of the things that's true about human beings, we can both think things before we know them, and we can actually not take action on things until we speak them. So who in your life is safe enough for you that you might choose to explore the answers you gave to both of those questions. With that level of investment in Joe's content, let's jump in.
Let's jump in, yes.
So I actually think one of the questions, Joe, that you should talk about or we should discuss, as is your preference, this is a pretty interesting title you've chosen for this book. I don't think many people yet have access to the book to have read it, so I just think it'd be important if you share how you took the concept of fierce and the concept of civility and chose to make them the title of your book.
It's a great question. First, I want to say thank you for those questions. Rob, thank you for your opening. I want to say what they said and what Carolyn said is the book. So you got the book already. Let's drink, let's eat. On many levels. So thank you for that, the resonance of that. I've been doing this kind of work for years. My first book is called Mastering Respectful Confrontation. So I'm really good with taking what seems to be polarized concepts and bringing them together, because I've always seen that one of the fundamental questions I've had, even as a kid, you know, my sister and I, we grew up in a pretty challenging, volatile childhood. And even in that, what I was tracking is this question of why is it, even though we know better, we're a relatively intelligent species. And I say the same examples. We can see close-up pictures of Pluto. We can see into the smallest of atoms. Why is it, even though we know better, we still have arguments and fights? And on a larger scale, crime and war and hunger and oppression. And for most people, the answer is that's just the way we are. And on some level, that is an accurate answer. I was never satisfied with this answer. I don't think you were ever satisfied with that answer. And I think there are a lot of people in this room who were never satisfied with that. So all of my life, I've been investigating that, from growing up in New York City and living in the Netherlands, working all over the world, just to investigate. The answer resides in human behavior. And what I was discovering is that for people who don't take the time to examine assumptions, that most of the human population, we're told something, we're told it by our parents, by our government, by our religious institutions, by our peers, by our teachers, of the way it is, and because we don't investigate it, we just believe it to be true. And that the first radical thing we can do, rebellious thing we can do, is just simply question what we believe to be true. In my study of this work, first Mastering Respectful Confrontation and now Fear Civility, what I was seeing is that a lot of things, the cause of it that was keeping us in these patterns is internal polarizations. And this idea of simply believing that we only have two options, this or that. And so I could go into respectful and confrontation, but I'll use fierce and civility. The chapter in my book is Reframing Civil Discourse from Chronic Niceness to Fierce Civility. And what I was seeing was that people who want to affect change, people want to approach something in an assertive way. They want to pierce through and get to the root causes of problems. If you don't examine and you think your only two choices are aggression and passivity and acquiescing, then there aren't many options. And I think that's what we're getting to, is that many of us are simply acquiescing and watching as injustices are happening, or we're in a fight mode. And one of the things that I bring up in this book is how do you confront a bully without becoming a bully? Because as soon as you use bullying tactics to approach a bully, the bullying system has just sucked you into its system. And for those of you who know Star Trek, it's like the Borg. It's basically, we've all just been connected into that. And it's just perpetuating the problem. Fighting the system is simply feeding the system. So, or we acquiesce, and in this level of anxiety we're all facing, a lot of what I bring up is that we're in serious nervous system dysregulation. We're all suffering from some level of trauma, whether it's personal trauma, cultural trauma, generational trauma, national trauma, systemic trauma. And in that state of trauma, the nervous system is in a state of dysregulation, which means it's constantly in a fight, flight, freeze response. Which means that anything that is different or new will be perceived as a threat, maybe even a threat to our lives. So in that, we can only revert almost to aggression or passivity. By bringing fierce and civility together, I redefine what fierce is, that it's not about aggression. It's about one of my fundamental beliefs, that it's in your vulnerability that your true power is revealed. And you can see that. Who would you consider fierce? A lot of the people we consider culturally and in your life, they are people who have had the courage to live lifestyles that they choose to live. And I've worked with people around the world who have chosen to live certain lifestyles and advocate for certain policies, even at the risk of their lives. That's fierce. There's the Taoist saying that I often use. The master asks the student, what is stronger, a mighty oak or a blade of grass? And the conclusion of the discussion is that in a monsoon, the mighty oak is going to snap like a twig, and that the grass is always going to persevere. So thinking about that, it redefines what strength and power is. Sometimes we got to be a mighty oak, and at the same time, we have to understand that being flexible and yielding is not weakness; it's actually strength. So my work, I really believe, is about creating an alchemical charge. Alchemy is basically taking a substance as it is, transforming it into something greater. And that is the essence of this work. Where are we going to see new solutions? Where are we going to see hope? When we have the courage to be in the heat of challenging conversations. We don't revert to the typical aggressor and defender. We are skilled to be in that high level of uncomfortable, making sure that we are safer in that experience. If we are safer, then we continue in the process, and there's for me and for people who have studied respectful confrontation and now fierce civility, which is kind of modeled after a sports training, like a martial arts training, is training yourself to be skillful in the twists and turns of difficult conversations, to be in that heat, because it's in that heat and tension that new solutions are going to emerge. New solutions are not going to emerge if we just get along. If only hanging out with people who already agree with you were going to solve our world problems, we would have solved our world problems already. So for me, the key is we have to find alliances in surprising places. Where at this moment, what Carolyn so beautifully did was to set us up to see that maybe our labels and the way we view people might not be as fixed as we think they are. That our label of them is different from who they actually are. And I talk about that, from my traditions with Taoism and Buddhism and other traditions, I break down human beings into three categories, not just loved one and enemy, but loved ones, strangers, and adversaries. And that if I need to strengthen my relationships, my sense of belonging with loved ones, I need to look at adversaries and see, are they really adversaries, or did my parents tell me they were adversaries? Or is that person an adversary, even though they're part of a group, and if I took the time to know them, that might shift. And the beauty of this method is to think, how can we today make a difference? Love thy stranger. You already loved your loved ones. I think love thy enemy, that's a lot to ask, particularly from people from marginalized communities. But love thy stranger, guess how many strangers you probably have on this planet? Close to 8 billion. So that to me gives us space to be able to, that's the work that we can do. So getting back to your question.
I was about to ask if anybody even remembered my question.
I remember your question. So, fierce civility. Putting that together creates an alchemical spark. And right now that's what we need. We're all stuck in patterns. We need something that's going to shake us out of the patterns we're in. What I call the stagnation of polarization, that like two rams that are ramming and they're constantly pushing. I'm right, no, I'm right, and all of those things. And one of the main points in the book is the power of the pivot. to learn how to just shift out of that polarization, get back to presence, connection, reorient, and from there look for new solutions. So fierce and civility creates that alchemical charge. I talk about chronic niceness in terms of civility as we have defined it. The classical definition of civility is not capable at this moment to confront successfully the level of lack of civility we're experiencing. The pain, the opposition, it is not powerful enough. And in fact, I would say that our current level of civility is outdated. It's for a privileged few. It's like an archaic idea of refined taste. And we need to redefine civility. And that's why I bring this idea of fierce civility. And because civility is in such threat at the moment, I commit to, and I invite anyone to commit to being fierce in preserving civility with yourself, with others, and most importantly, in the integrity of the conversations that you're in. How was that?
It was excellent, and I've learned that I won't be asking very many questions tonight.
I just wanted to set that up.
It was fabulous. It was fabulous. So your need to redefine the word civility comes from the fact that, as you said, civility down through the centuries has changed its meaning to now being niceness and politeness. While I was leading the National Institute for Civil Discourse, in the early years, every speech I gave, every place I went, people challenged, well, what is civility anyway? And I got really tired of that question. So I decided to go to my Oxford English Dictionary and actually look up the roots of civility. And this actually isn't, I think knowing this is a little addition to what you have already done. The actual original definition of civility was a French word that came from the either 12 or 1400s. It's been a long time since I talked about this. And what it actually means, which is right in line with what Joe is trying to help his readers learn how to do, is the duties of citizenship. Now, how far we have toned down, changed the word civility.
Yeah.
But I think everything you've written in this book, in terms of if people really begin to practice it, it would in fact be a form of increasing your capacities to be a good citizen and help other people be good citizens.
Yes.
So the next question I had, which I'm worried about actually, one of the things where pretty early in the book, which I think is really important, is you describe the highest common ground guiding principles, the highest common guiding principles. And I think in my experience in working with people, if you can in fact establish a ground of common values or a ground, it's a meta level of meaning. And I think it'd be great to share with folks those principles and how they figure in creating the foundation for the book.
Thank you. So that is how I reframe civilities with these 5 highest guiding principles. And having studied many different traditions, as I mentioned, and also different religions and spiritual practices, indigenous pathways as well, ethical codes, what I traced was that I gleaned out of that 5 common themes that have helped us as human beings evolve to our best selves and to create civil society in a sense. They are respect, dignity, which to me means being valued, bless you, belonging, freedom, and collaboration. Respect, dignity, belonging, freedom, collaboration. It's a blueprint for lasting peace, and that's what this book is. It's a blueprint for lasting peace. Not just peace. Putting down arms doesn't mean that there's peace, doesn't mean that people are now dancing in the streets, hugging each other, working together. It simply means what it is. We're no longer at war. Lasting peace is an ongoing process. And we have to cultivate, and this book is gleaning that from my experience and from all of the wisdom I've learned from so many people about what is the blueprint, the structure for lasting peace, society of lasting peace. And these 5 guiding principles I think are important. Why they are important is that we all get it, and what we're currently seeing is that many of us are like, I want that. I want respect. I want to belong. And oftentimes at the expense of others. I will do anything for my freedom. And that in some levels, particularly in certain circles, the idea of collaborating is seen as weakness, right? And giving up in a sense. I think that we evolve as people and as a society when we wake up in the morning and our first thought is, how can I create for others that they feel that they are respected, that they have dignity, that they belong, that they have freedom, and that they're open to collaboration. And that even higher than that is that we commit to helping create the systems that allow those who are disempowered and have no privilege, don't have the opportunity, like with some of the communities I'm working with around the world, their concern is that a bomb doesn't drop on their house tonight, that how do you create those systems, or in West Baltimore or some communities here in the United States, where they're just worried that they're not going to be shot tomorrow. How do you create systems where they have opportunities to step into their personal agency and to do those things?
So the book essentially has 3 parts, and the questions that I've asked so far kind of give the guts of the first part. And the second part is all about skills. Specifically, what do I have to be able to do to actually engage with people with whom I have a big difference or conflict in a way that works in Joe's framework. And the third part of the book is about strategies. So, Joe, I think a good way for us to spend our time is first for you to share a bit about the skills, not trying to cover all the skills that you have in the book, but maybe highlighting 1 or 2 that you believe are most essential as people begin this journey.
Yeah, thank you. I call them the skills and strategies of the heart. And a lot of this work is about the heart, the global heart, the individual heart, and that this book is an appeal to the heart. There are so many organizations and government agencies that spend millions and millions of dollars and euros or whatever to research and come up with solutions to our global problems. Many of you in this room are part of those conversations. And that is great, but my feeling is that those will never come to fruition as long as we are all, as I said, in a certain state of personal or cultural trauma. That we're not going to be, because in that personal and cultural trauma that we're in, our hearts are shut down. We've hardened our hearts. We're not going to be opened up for new solutions. I am not a head person in terms of statistics and numbers. I can do it, and some of you might say maybe I can. It's a real stretch. Some of you in this room, my sister's going like this, no. So I will trust her since she knows me the longest, and plenty of people back there would say the same. My strategy is that we got that down. We have all the information. We got the intellectual stuff down. And that's what's keeping us in the polarization, is we're arguing opinions and what we believe. And it stays at that level. And what I'm saying, the strategy is we've got to drop into our hearts. That's where change can happen. That's when we come back to ourselves. That's when we reconnect. That's when we come back to common sense. We get back into our bodies. We're in the present moment. We're in authentic connection. That is the only way new solutions are going to emerge. And we need those skills. So for me, being in the heart is not some Hallmark cardy sentimentality notion. To be in your heart requires courage in this day and age. It requires skills and strategies. So this book is about, and in terms of the skills, what the Civility book focuses on is what I say, there's a chapter called It's Not About the What, It's Also About the How. We spend a lot of time focusing on the what, And our points may be correct. It may be factually correct. We may be able to back it up with statistics or Bible verses or however we make our point. But how we are approaching it is, I think, a large part of the problem. And that's really all Fierce Civility is doing, is helping us strategize and cultivate skills to approach it in a way that gets past the mental constructs of separation and remembers that what is, I believe, to be true is that every single creature on this planet, including the planet itself, is interconnected and interdependent. It always has been that way. It currently is that way. It will always be that way. And that any ways where we feel like we are separate or we label or create judgment is simply a mental construct. And so this idea, so the good news is that the current situation we're in now, human beings created it. The good news is that we human beings can change it. It's just a matter of shifting our perspective and trusting the transformational power of the heart. So in terms of skills, first one is, and I forgot to mention also a great person, I think, who's doing remarkable work, Dr. Elizabeth Stanley, with her book, Widen the Window. I'm promoting my book, and I'm telling you, buy her book. It's remarkable, and I've learned a lot from her and from others of understanding the basics of neurobiology. And simply the practice of rewiring your nervous system, that as soon as you feel polarization happening, as soon as you feel activation happening, where you're getting stuck, is to first remember the pivot. It always starts with a pivot. How do you get out of the stuckness? And in this stuckness is to remember that being uncomfortable is not necessarily being unsafe. And that the nervous system, when it's uncomfortable, especially a nervous system that has trauma, can't tell the difference. So one of the skills is to train ourselves to be able to say, I'm beginning to feel uncomfortable, to check for yourself, do an honest assessment, not a judgment, to determine, am I feeling safe or is it just uncomfortable? And if you decide I am feeling relatively safe in this moment, continue, as you said. And if it's uncomfortable, that we train ourselves to say, great, this is going to be a juicy conversation. And if we trust ourselves through it, something new is going to emerge that hasn't even existed yet. So the first skill is very simple, that I actually developed from learning from different people, what I did working with combat veterans that I worked with. When they were in a PTSD state. Simply feet on the ground, focus in your center, connect with your heart, take deep breaths in through your nose, out through your mouth. That's one skill. So what you're going to discover if you read when you read this book is something that I love saying whenever I would do a training at NASA with respectful confrontation. This work is not rocket science. I always laughed when I did that. They didn't think it was so fun. Anyway, it's not rocket, it's very simple. But in this idea, if it's not about the what, it's about the how. I hear so many people say, but Joe, I know all this. But then I would challenge them to say, are you actually doing it in each moment? So as you know, you just said that, a lot of this is taking ideas and training yourself to put them into action in every moment, especially in the challenges. Another skill is to cultivate independent critical thinking, to be able to discern the difference between a viewpoint and a fact. And the pivot out of that is to train yourself to say, my truth does not equal the truth. And to and in a sense, it's a whole other skill. Wow. He just came right into my space.
There's a problem with the sound.
That was uncomfortable.
But it was safe.
But it was safe.
Take
Yeah.
3 deep breaths.
So those are a couple of skills, and there's one's more abstract. Literally training yourself to go from being in the patterns that we often fall into of aggressor, defender, to nurturer and protector. That and to be able to, in challenging situations, to be able to nurture and protect yourself as well as others. And in a conversation, which I think is crucial, to nurture and protect the integrity of the conversation. That it's our job in difficult conversations and challenging conversations for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In a few minutes, actually, I'm going to open this up to questions from all of you, and I'm telling you this now so that you can switch your mental gears if, in fact, you want to ask a question. But before doing that, I'm going to ask Joe to talk a little bit about when you've finished the section on skills, you then move into the strategies of how to apply those skills. And again, without trying to do the comprehensive of the whole thing, a couple that stand out to you that you'd like to share with people.
So the strategy part is what I call the pathway of hope. For your civility pathway of hope. It's 6 steps to get us from polarization and all the steps that lead us to lasting peace. Lasting peace culturally, but it could also be
We're taking a moment here to fix the microphones in case you on streaming are wonder what's going on here.
from polarization to lasting peace. And these skills, it's like, that's where it comes into sports or martial arts training, is that just like with tennis, if you think about the give and take of tennis, you've got to train yourself to have those skills, you have to also train yourself strategically, to be present, to have that peripheral awareness, kinesthetic awareness, to be able to meet challenges as they come in the moment, to stay in the conversation. It's a celebration of debate. And very quickly, the 6 steps are breaking the polarization is 1, fostering healing and reconciliation is 2, 3 is finding alliances in surprising places, 4 is creating the conditions for coming up with inclusive solutions. 5 is strategizing on coming up with new inclusive, resilient solutions. And 6 is creating a blueprint of lasting peace. That could be lasting peace social in a society. It could be a resolution of a family issue. It could be an organization.
That's fine.
Okay.
I told Joe ahead of time that I was going to ask him this question because I didn't want him to be caught by surprise. As you can tell, as Joe talks about his book, it is a very complete exploration of the combinations of skills and strategies. And what I shared with Joe, having worked in this field for a lot of years, the vast majority of Americans, thank God, really know that where we are is wrong and want to do something about it. But most of them don't know how to go about getting started. And what I said to Joe is, this is fantastic for someone who has decided to really commit themselves to a real change in how they are living their lives. In the context in which many people in this room, Cheryl and Debbie Lynn and others of you that I don't know, are working in groups of the public who are coming together, not so sure they're in a safe place, but actually pre-designed they begin to know they're in a safe place. But at most, they're going to take away 1, 2, or 3 ideas about how they could become part of the solution as opposed to being part of the problem. And I think a lot of those people would be overwhelmed by the amount of excellent, wise advice that Joe is giving in this book. So the question I told him I was going to ask him, if you were in the situation where you had to only tell people 3 things to do to begin to be on this path. Now, I did warn him. I don't know if he got ready or not, but now's the time, Joe.
Okay. First thing I would say is make sure you take care of yourself. This idea is to cultivate personal agency, resilience. The time needs us to be resourceful, what I call the renewable you, to take care of yourself, your own durability, whatever that means for you, physically, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually. We need to be vital times are challenging, and they may remain challenging for a long time. And part of that is not only taking care of yourself, but strengthening and fostering the relationships that nurture you. That is really key. So that when you come to these challenging conversations, you are vital, you're not depleted, because when we're depleted is when we get into our fight, flight, freeze response and we get reactive and we aren't staying connected to our hearts. The second is to consider that if you're having a conversation with someone with a different viewpoint and you'd like to see them shift that viewpoint, people don't change, they transform. I would say that to expect someone to change means you're asking them to be something they are not. And I would say that's not only aggression, but on some level violence. And that's what I think we're seeing playing out, is people on the extremes, the extreme left and the extreme right, are in such a state of panic, on a sense, because the messaging they're getting from the opposition is, you have to be different than what you are. You have to change, on both sides. So I would say people don't change, they transform. What transforms are viewpoints, habits, and patterns. I can't change, I can't be something I'm not, but I can transform my viewpoints, I can transform my habits, I can transform my patterns. That still allows me to be me. At the same time, people will only transform their viewpoints, habits, and patterns if they feel some level of safety and some level of trust. It doesn't have to be complete, but some level. And that for us all to remember, we have viewpoints. We are not our viewpoints. If we believe we are our viewpoints, it's going to be or someone believes that, it's going to be very difficult to let that go. But if we remember we have viewpoints, it might be easier to let it go. To transform it, the alchemical process, into something even greater than what we were. That's two. How's that? How am I doing? How am I doing?
You're doing great.
Okay, great. The last thing is this idea of really, fierce civility to me is a plea, an appeal to people to understand the importance of being nurturers and protectors on this planet. Imagine if you committed to becoming what I would call a safe refuge. That your sole purpose on this planet is to be safe refuge for as many people as possible. What if our purpose as human beings on this planet was simply to be nurturers and protectors for all other creatures and for the planet itself? It wasn't to have sovereignty over other creatures and the planet. It was to truly be servants of, servant leadership, to be supporters of. So when you're stepping into these conversations, to approach it from that place and to appeal to the heart. If you're with Uncle Vinny or Cousin Frankie or Auntie Ethel, I'm just making up names, and they have very different viewpoints, and you're dreading going and having Thanksgiving dinner with them or a meal, one of the people ask, what do I do when we get into the fights? Is to appeal to the heart, to just literally feel your feet on the ground, focus in your center, take a deep breath, connect with them and say, I miss you. I miss what we had before all of this happened. Can we in some way get back to that? That cuts through all your viewpoints on any ideas you have about the government or about politics or any of it. And that is what I think is the most crucial thing.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm going to add one thing, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
Learned in the context of doing all of this work in socially short-term places where people really are caught in this polarization. When people have the transformative experience that you described, and you described it very, very well, we can't forget human beings are social beings, and they respond to the structures they're in and the signals they get in those structures. So if I've been holding this view very rigidly, and I do have a moment of transformation when I go through Cheryl's workshop, I'm likely to go back to the same social system with the same people that had solidified the position I had before this experience of transformation. So what we've learned to do, and I did it kind of very simply with you, is before leaving that moment of transformation, identify in your mind the person or persons or social setting that will want to learn about what you've just experienced and will help support keeping it alive. Because otherwise it's very much too simple to drop back into the pattern and the habit that you were surrounded with before. Okay, who has a question for Joe? We don't have mics, so the way this is going to work is if you will project it, they've asked me to repeat it so that people who are watching the streaming can actually hear the question before Joe responds.
I have a question.
Please.
Joe, I think your fierce civility seems to be directed from individual to individuals. In Washington, D.C. in particular, we understand the effect of institutions and how institutions control individuals. And how do your fierce civility deal with the issue of institutions driving people?
So the question, an excellent question from a DC resident, is Joe's focus in the way he's written the book is mostly individual to individual. And the question is, we're sitting here in the seat of the power of government in the country in which institutions have a lot of control over how individuals behave. So his question to Joe is, how does your system work when you're dealing with the way institutions control individuals?
I'll try to do that briefly. It has to start somewhere, right? And for me, it starts with the individual. So in the second to last chapter on creating a blueprint for lasting peace, I offer a way to get there. And in each chapter, I present a false polarity that we get stuck in, either externally or internally, offer a pivot out of it, and then offer a skill or a strategy to then take that further. And in this is that oftentimes, if we want to see the world system or structures change, we tend to confront the structure itself. And that's creating the false polarity of me versus the structure. And the pivot would be to say that cultural transformation has to begin with personal transformation. All the great cultural transformers have started working on themselves. They've spent decades in contemplation, spiritual practice, and deep challenges to get them to the point where they have the resourcefulness and the capacity to affect change. So I would say pivot away from the power over system or the systems as they are. It's a longer process. It's not going to happen overnight. And cultivate where do you currently have power now? Then, there's 3 steps in that. There's power within, power with, and power to. It's a system that I've been using around the world with transformational leadership, as well as many people are using this model. Starts with how do you cultivate the power within? Then, how do you seek out strategic alliances? Not in a subversive way, but simply in an mutual empowerment. The work is about creating cultures of mutual empowerment. How do you strengthen those alliances? Suddenly, your power has increased now that you have alliances. And then from there, how do you take these alliances, go to the third thing, which is power to. Getting that out to create systems that are more beneficial for people who don't have the capacity to even think about power within. And it's a slow process, but that's again the difference between change and transformation. You can transform a work culture or a system, it takes time, and because you're transforming it, it will be lasting change. Administration change, that's not lasting as we see playing out right now with a lot of our policies. So that's a very general answer, but let's have a talk more and I can share, but that is the premise of that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Joe, I love you. I love your work. I love the dream that you're building here. And yet, the entire time through this talk, I am just thinking about threat. Threat, threat, threat. Having just spent 3 hours playing on ChatGPT and social media threat, and the institution that we are up against that is transforming society. And I don't think anyone has the answers, but I think of you as of a heart group. Have you thought about that and how we combat as individuals leading with our hearts? How do we combat something that big? How do you I'd love your thoughts on that.
Well, first of all, Mary, I feel your heart, and you're doing remarkable work, so I know where this is coming from, so thank you.
Repeat the
So
question.
Yeah,
the
we're gonna-
question from clearly a dear friend of Joe's, acknowledging that he is leading this work from his heart and wants and does touch our hearts, was acknowledging that every day many of us are experiencing intense threats, not just to democracy, but to our own freedom of thought on social media. You talked about ChatGPT. And basically her question is, I get it. I want to lead with my heart. I know you're leading with your heart. But how on earth do we actually combat something that is so large and so distant from any personal ability to influence it?
Let's all take a deep breath for that. Feel your feet on the ground, focus in your center, your heart. And I of course have a lot to say on that, but what I will say is that we have no other choice. I start my book with a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt that she said in 1960, at the height of the missile crisis, when for the first time, I think, in human history, human beings had the capacity to wipe out all creatures on this planet. First time ever. That did a lot to our psyche, yes? Where she said, we're either going to die together or we're going to learn to live together. And if we're going to live together, then we have to talk. And in the UN Attorney General report said the same thing. We're at an inflection point. This was in 2021, I believe. I've got my experts here, where it said we're at an inflection point of breakdown or breakthrough, where it's just going to continue to devolve into crisis, or we're going to find a new way to be with one another. I want to go for the breakthrough part. And I believe that in this idea of alchemy, it needs to be this level of compression to get to expansion. And so that's an easy answer, but I would say we have no other choice. And that there are more people, I believe, than we're being led to believe, who do come from the heart. The media is playing a game with us. Really, because it makes sense. It's survival of the fittest. They want to survive. It's about profit. So they're taking reality and they're sensationalizing it. I thought about that when I was living in the Netherlands, and I would come back and I would watch the Weather Channel here in the U.S. 24-hour weather. It's like, oh my God! It's like they turned it into a horror movie. A storm is coming to devour us, to destroy us, and it made sense to me. It's like, yeah, it's and I talk about this in the book. Information inflation. Too many outlets chasing too few stories. So in order to get us to watch their version of the story, they have to inflate it, sensationalize. So I would say an important thing is what gives me hope, and what I talk about here is to tell people who is telling your story in all aspects, in this as well. Yes, these things are happening, and to consider that maybe it's time for us to tell our story in a new way. And I would advocate for you to tell a story of fierce hope. Make yourself the central heroic figure of that story, and find your way to engage more people into that. It doesn't have to be all of us, just enough of us. And there's a statistic out now, Debbie Lynn and I were just talking about this, it's 3.5%.
3.5% rule.
You just need 3.5% of a population or organization to shift it. 3.5%. I meant to do the math before I came back here to find out what 3.5% is of 8 billion, but as you know, numbers is not my thing. But in the US, how much is that?
11.8 million.
So it just needs 11.8 million people committed in creating power within towards a common goal. And that the answer is an appeal to the heart. It brings us back to the present moment. It shakes people out of, we're all on some level, I mean, brainwash is a big word, but I'm using it. We're all on some level caught up in this spell. And the only thing that's going to help us wake up out of this spell is getting into our bodies and into our hearts. As a starting point, that's not the final solution, but without that, we're not going to see reform. So I have hope, and reach out with people, make it a daily practice to get on to who is your 5 people who have catalysts of fierce hope. I'm serious. Make a list and text each other daily. When we all start floundering, say, listen, I need a little dose of hope. And that's what's going to sustain us. Because, you know, I've been saying, may I keep going? I can't stop, sorry.
Really? We didn't know.
For about 15 years or more, in every lecture or workshop that I give, I start by saying, the bad news is that the systems as we know them are crumbling. The good news is the systems as we know them are crumbling. And we're in that in-between liminal space that's causing an enormous amount of anxiety. That helps me place it in the context. We're all,
Again,
we're all trying our best to manage the high levels of uncertainty and anxiety. And any way we can help people regulate their nervous systems by creating that sense of safe refuge, that's already more than enough that we can be doing.
so I want to add something to your question, if I may.
Please. And then we should
This
kind of
is-
wrap up because I'm hungry. So
This is not well known, but in this country, there is a real attempt, a lot by professional journalists, to come back from what has happened, particularly to print journalism and is about to happen to broadcast journalism, to reinvent, experiment, innovate for local media, which is still the most trusted media in this country, to change the role of professional journalists to really be collaborators in their communities. And there is a document called the Roadmap for Local Media, how to ensure that a community has the civic information needed to behave democratically. And if you all wanted to copy that report, I would email it to Joe, and Joe could email it. But the message is, this is happening in communities all over the country. And wherever you live, you might want to see if you can help invest in a group of young journalists who are really reinventing the source of our news to create it to be trusted again. So I think you're messaging that we should be stopping.
I think we should. I want to say some
Okay.
thanks again, but I just want to.
Okay, and if I may, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay.
I just wanted to add to that is that there is more happening than we know.
There's more what?
Locally, more happening.
Yeah.
And I just want to say a couple more thanks for people who aren't here. I want to thank Gina Mazza, my incredible editor, who has done a remarkable job dancing with me with this book, and Veronica Chordas, who did the beautiful design and created her own alchemy and magic in this. And that this was a collaborative process. A number of people, I started this as kind of like a workshop, online workshop before the pandemic, of people who were here to support me in so many ways. So this project is a collaborative process, and and it's dedicated to all of you. So thank you.
In some ways, I feel like Joe should have the last word, but he chose, so here I go. I wanted to share one more thing that touched me in the book, and that I think is something valuable for each of us to carry away on our own journeys. In the last chapter, which he titles Seeing the World Anew, and he already shared the fantastic Eleanor Roosevelt quote about what we have to do in order to survive and thrive. But Joe tells a story in his personal life in terms of it's a conversation between he and his father, which for years he didn't really understand. But sometime later, the light bulb came on in terms of what that meant to him as an adult. And what Joe says, I really want to underline, because every single one of us in this room has had this kind of experience more than once, but we tend to discount it. And when we discount it, we're actually foregoing some of the deepest wisdom available to us as human beings. And this is the way Joe describes it. Many of us have witnessed and lived moments similar to the precious interaction I had with my father when I was a young boy. Yet because the power of intuitive wisdom is not widely accepted by conventional science, we dismiss it as fantasy or sentimentality. I think one of the important things to take away from the entire journey that Joe has shared with us, those moments of intuitive wisdom that seem to come to us from nowhere, and that we don't necessarily make sense of them in the moment in which they come, are some of the most valuable guideposts of our lives. Thank you.